Students, in this video I'm going to talk a little bit about the War of 1812, and hopefully we'll move right through the conflict. At the beginning of the conflict, it seems as though Great Britain has a number of significant advantages. They have 600 warships compared to the 16 of the United States, and they have 250,000 soldiers as compared to 18,000 held by the United States. They also have better relations with the Indians and stronger alliances with the Native American tribes. At the same time, they have some significant disadvantages as well. The first is that they're so far away from the United States. It's always going to be difficult in the 19th century fighting a war at such a long distance against a committed enemy. Basically, it's going to be like the Revolutionary War. Unless you can break the spirit of your enemy, you're not going to be successful. You're not going to be able to defeat them. They're going to be able to continue to resist you. And second, the British are fighting a long war against Napoleon and Napoleon's efforts to conquer Europe. And this is a much more serious conflict for the British. If they lose this war, then they're going to be invaded and conquered and ruled over. If they lose the War of 1812 with the Americans, they're not going to get back a colony they have already lost. So lower stakes, lower investment for them, and it's difficult to be invested because it's so far away. The campaigns of the war actually begin with an American offensive action, an American effort to invade Canada. Remember that I said that there's this long-standing American ambition to make Canada the sort of 14th colony or the next state. And the Americans assume that the Canadians want to be independent in the same way that they do. And they're actually very wrong in this, that a lot of loyalists after the Revolutionary War had moved to Canada and had settled there and were quite happy being part of the British Empire and didn't want that to change. And so these invasions of Canada by the Americans are generally pretty disastrous. They're all repelled fairly successfully, apart from one successful action which captures the city of York, which will eventually be renamed the city of Toronto, and by the actions of a young man named Perry, last name Perry, who takes control of Lake Erie. So in a battle that he had no right to win. Vastly outnumbered, vastly outgunned. Somehow he defeats the British and the Americans, even though they're unable to conquer Canada or gain land in Canada. They're still able to control the Great Lakes, and this means that their border is that much more secure against British invasions. So that's the northern frontier. On the southern theater of the war, we have invasions of the American states and the American territories by Indian allies of the British, Seminoles and the Creeks. And these invasions are defeated and then thrown back by an army led by the leader of the Tennessee militia, a man named Andrew Jackson, who's going to be very important in American history as we move forward. And so Jackson throws back these invasions. With him in his army are two young men who will be very important to the history, the ongoing history of the United States, Davy Crockett and Sam Houston. They're both a part of this army. And this army achieves a great victory at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, which forever breaks the power of Native Americans in parts of southern Georgia and southern Alabama. The treaty that's agreed afterwards basically ensures that the United States is going to control these territories from now on. The Native American tribes have been driven back into Spanish Florida. And this was a pretty brutal part of the war. There were massacres carried out by both sides. We're also introduced to the figure of Andrew Jackson, who I say is going to be a pivotal figure in the early 19th century history of the United States for much of the remaining period of this class. Just to give you a sense of what this man was like, he's a highly successful general, even with a small army, and he's successful because he maintains iron discipline. And this was something that was pretty rare among American troops or in the American military culture at the time. It was very much a case of this isn't a professional army. These are people who are defending their own communities. They kind of just pitch up to fight. And that often comes with a certain amount of individualism and independence. And Jackson wouldn't put up with that. He was committed to defending Tennessee and defending the South, but he would brook no opposition to his control of the army. He had a 17-year-old soldier publicly executed in front of the army for being disobedient, which by the standards of the time he was certainly within his rights to do, but it was certainly seen as the act of a strict disciplinarian at the time. So just keep that in mind, just keep Andrew Jackson's background in mind as we move forward with the class. And so we've had the Southern campaigns, the Southern theater, successful for the United States. We've had the Northern campaigns, the Northern theater that has become something of a stalemate. And then the British try and break this stalemate by conducting raids in the Chesapeake region, in the region of Virginia. And so the British, basically, they have the huge navy offshore, they're sending raiding parties ashore, and it's kind of taunting the United States. Remember, that's kind of what this war is all about. They're not treating the United States as an equal country. And so by going ashore and raiding, they're kind of sending this message, you're not able to defend your land. And really at this point, American leadership and American military response in this war is largely disorganized. Jackson's been successful, but he's kind of the only one. And then in the most humiliating defeat for the Americans, a British raid seizes the capital, Washington, D.C., that no one is able to defend it. There are no troops available. Those that are of poor quality, and the British take Washington, D.C., burn parts of it, including the White House. And so this seems like a really desperate time in the War of 1812, that the Americans can't even defend their own capital. And so Madison is appealing to the American people to defend their land, and the British move on to the city of Baltimore. And the strategy here is that if they can take the city, they're very much going to be in control of the region. They're going to hopefully be able to split the colonies. And Baltimore holds out. The British are unable to capture Baltimore. Its defense inspires Francis Scott Key to write the Star-Spangled Banner. That's the bombardment that's being talked about. The British ships are shelling Baltimore, and he sees this shelling taking place. He's inspired the next morning when he sees the American flag still flying there to write this song, this verse that becomes the American national anthem. So lots of aspects of American culture being formulated at this point. And so this British expedition has been a partial success, but also a partial failure. And they try and follow it up with an invasion of New England from Canada. And this invasion is defeated at the Battle of Lake Champlain. And so now it's 1814. The British have suffered a number of defeats, and they're recognizing it's going to be very difficult for them to win a war that they didn't particularly want to fight in the first place. And so they're willing to come to terms, to very generous terms, with the Americans and make a peace treaty called the Treaty of Ghent, G-H-E-N-T. And at this treaty, they agree that the boundaries of the nations will be the pre-war boundaries. And this is a huge win for the Americans, because you still have British troops on American soil in New England, on American soil in the Midwest around the Great Lakes, on American soil around the DC and Virginia area, and the British are willing to give all of these up and come to peace extremely quickly, much more quickly than anyone expected. And we see how unexpected this quick and easy peace was in a couple of important events that take place after the Treaty of Ghent has been signed, but before news of it has reached the United States. And the way these events unfold show that neither side expected the end of the war to come this quickly. The first event is the Battle of New Orleans. The British, it's kind of like the Revolutionary War. They try the North, they try the Middle, they try the South. They try attacking New Orleans, establishing a foothold there, preventing American commercial traffic from making its way down the Mississippi. And so they attack New Orleans, but the Americans are ready for them. The Americans, led by Andrew Jackson, and basically it's a slaughter. The English are thoroughly defeated. And this is the victory that the American Republic really needed. And so this war is going to come to an end, but they really haven't done very well. Their capital city has been burned, and so they desperately need a victory. And we're told this victory inspired this huge surge of patriotism. Andrew Jackson becomes a national hero. Fighting for the United States becomes a heroic thing to do. And this wave of patriotism influences the other event that happens without knowing about the Treaty of Ghent that's going through. And this is the Hartford Convention. Remember that New England Federalists did not want the 1812 war in the first place. That they wanted to continue to trade with the British, that they were far less worried about national honor, and the independence of the United States. They were far more worried about maintaining their merchant economy. And as the war drags on, they decide to gather together in a convention and to plan to take control of the United States so they can get it out of this war and so they can wrest control of the United States away from what they see as the populist Republicans. They want to take political power in the United States away from Jefferson and Madison and their followers. And so they get together in the Hartford Convention and they propose a number of measures, including one that's very interesting, where they say a president can only have one term and the next president can't come from the same state. And this is very obviously aimed at Virginia, which is still the largest, the wealthiest colony that's produced 3 out of the 4 presidents so far. And they also prepare for the New England colonies to secede, that the New England colonies will leave the Union that's no longer beneficial to them. And they draw up these resolutions and they go to deliver them to Washington, D.C. And when they arrive, what do they hear? They hear a really advantageous peace treaty has been signed with the British that treats the Americans like an equal nation, and that Andrew Jackson has won this great victory. And so, of course, now no one cares what they think or what they have to say. And also, everyone thinks they're traitors. So this is really the end of the line for the Federalist Party. In the era that we're going to study next week, and especially the week after, they have very little political power outside of New England, and no one really trusts them again, and they're seen as un-American. At the same time as you have someone like Andrew Jackson, who's portrayed as a hero for standing up against the British invasion, you have these people who are negotiating with your enemy just for money, and this is seen as very contemptible. And so we see the Federalists fall from grace. And so this is the end of the 1812 war. Important consequences: independence of the United States being treated as an equal nation by the great European powers. That's becoming increasingly more the case. Patriotism, fighting for the United States rather than just your individual state, and that being seen as a heroic thing, that's also becoming more prevalent. And lastly, but not insignificantly, the industrialization of the United States. But typically in the past, the Americans have relied on British goods for industry. They haven't been able to do that during the war, so they've started to develop factories and mills themselves. And these in the future are going to help the United States become industrially independent.